Yeah, there's several. I mean, I did explain about the lights. So I've got problems with integrating light, which also transfers into learning difficulties, so dyslexia and dyscalculia. Problems with remembering faces, so face blindness. Problems without the glasses in integrating visuals as a whole, so fragmentation, and more so when I was a child, developing and having severe or classic autism, as one may call it. I had problems with getting visual meaning, so I'd lick, sniff, tap, rub to sort of gain semantics or meaning from my surroundings. Yeah, face blindness, the way in which it affects me, so from a personal perspective, it is a face, to me, without these glasses, is just fragmented. It's pieces. So it's kind of like trying to look at the whole, but only seeing pieces. And the pieces which you do see with clarity, everything else is neglected. So if I was to take my glasses off now and look at your face, I may see your nose, but lose your eyes. I may see your eyes, but lose the nose and mouth. I may see the mouth, but lose everything above the mouth. I cannot process or perceive a face as a whole without these glasses. But still with these glasses, although they help me see your face as a whole, I still struggle with context. So that's contextually where someone is or where I'm used to seeing them. So I'm used to seeing you here, and say if I saw you here in the same room, in the same sort of way, in the same chair, that would give me a reasonable sort of understanding that is you. The way in which I understand people from the past in terms of recollection is not through their face, but through patterns of movement, i.e. how they move, and actually how they speak. So if I forget those two things, or don't perceive them or process them rather quick enough, then I will lose them. And the next one is object blindness. So if you expand what I said about face blindness, which is just seeing a face as fragments, then you would just expand that to the whole visual field. So everything is in bits. So you focus on one thing and you neglect other things. So it's not being able to actually bring anything visually into a whole. And when I was younger, it was like living in a visual kaleidoscope where things would just be bits and shine and shimmer, rather than actually anything that had anything in terms of tangibility or concreteness, I suppose. So the glasses not only help me with seeing your face, but to just use you as an example, the glasses actually help me see you as a coherent person. So if I didn't have these glasses, you'd be a floating head, or I'd focus on your arm and lose your torso. It's just not bringing anything visually together is what object blindness is. Yeah, I think that's a very good use of the word key, because it's going to be different for each person. For me, it's glasses. For someone else, it could be something completely different. So maybe that you've got something there where you're actually looking at what the specifics are and how you can empower that person, regardless of where they are on the spectrum, regardless of if they have a learning disability or not. It doesn't matter. It's things that are meaningful and work. Yes, I touched upon that, meaning blindness. So I've talked about the visual fragmentation. Now, meaning blindness is to do with not actually seeing things with meaning. Now, I went to eye tests in about 5 years old because I've got what's that word? Myopic in this eye, short-sightedness. They found that out through doing various tests. And I had my glasses, but what it done is it magnified all the distortions. So when I was younger, the only way in which I could navigate a real world was through other senses. So meaning blindness is semantics visually are meaningless. So it's quite natural that my mum thought I was a deaf-blind child because of how I behave. So I'd lick, sniff, tap and rub my surroundings. For example, I remember my mum from the texture of her hair. I remembered my father, or associate my father, because of my name. Oh, where is my name? It's over there, isn't it? Name Isaacs. He's got, you know, big Jewish features. So sculpting his face was like a work of art. But that is how I would sort of infiltrate that meaninglessness through actually touching stuff, because touching, sniffing, even spitting on my hand and putting saliva on my hand to gain texture, feel. I'm already giving you the foundation that the person in question who has these issues is not getting anything visually significant, so they have to use other means. Well, looking at my early years growing up, it was obviously very difficult for my parents. I was functionally non-verbal and for a time, and I didn't gain functional speech. That was actually use of speech until about 7 or 8 years old. That's about year 4. I didn't get diagnosed till 24 in 2010, so it's a mainstream setting. So going back to your question, my parents initially all they could do was accept that some of these unusual behaviours were happening. And I suppose if we're going to port it over into a professional context, it's about observing where those behaviours come from. What is the reason behind it? What is going on in the environment? How are they hearing the environment? How are they seeing the environment? How is their body interacting with their environment? What is their balance like? So it's almost like, I mean, I've given a few examples, but it's a tick list. It's almost like being a detective, because no one person with autism is the same. And specifically with visual issues, another key thing is it visual or integration? Let's use visual as an example, where maybe the patterns are too overstimulating, or is it visual perception? It's actually a perceptual loss, like the meaning blindness, or do they have both? So my recommendation is understanding the source of the sensory issue and working from there. Touch and sound. Right, so for touch, it's understanding it, why the person, let's use the example of evading touch. How is their nervous system and body reacting to touch? So it's the interpretation they may be getting from their body. On the flip side of that is touch actually externally a mode of communication and understanding who that person is. So you can flip it around. Do they use touch as a way of referencing someone? Or do they actually struggle with their body because how their nervous system reacts to it, being touched? So the example I gave in my speech recently was a young man. I knocked on the door. He's functionally non-verbal, very bright young man. And what he'd done, when I opened the door, he plucked a strands of my hair and he sniffed it and he knew it was me. So that's an example of understanding that it's the understanding that the behaviour has a meaning and you find out what that meaning is. So that's touch. With sound, again, how are they actually hearing the world? How are they filtering, or rather not filtering, certain stimuli? And I suppose you kind of look at environments, say an educational perspective, the classroom they're in, the colours, the different levels of noise coming from different things in the room, projectors, lights, computers, laptops. There's more and more things that make noise in a classroom now than even when I was at school. So you look at that as well. Again, it's similar to some of the other things I've said about the philosophy I've got. It's the stacking. So which bit stacking is the foundation? and then you work from there. Yeah, I would say with even as autism as its whole, you would sort of subcategorise in a sense. You're looking for specifics. So autism isn't one thing anyway. So if you were looking at a specific issue such as sensory processing, what I'd first look at is it sensory integration? So is it to do with being over or understimulated by a sense, or is it sensory perception? So understanding what is being seen, or how they understand faces, for example, or how they understand objects, or how they see visually. So those are two different things, integration and perception. And of course, a person can have both. And depending on which one they have, different strategies will go in place. Not only because of the differences they have, but also the way in which they learn. How do they learn? And the way in which they understand language. How do they understand language? So I suppose it's broadening it out more. If you initially look at sensory issues, you're quite naturally, if you're going to try and communicate with them about this and try and empower them by looking at different ways, you've got to look at those other three things as well.